Was a little kiddie, not more than about 8 years of age, and my mom was standing at the doorway. She just switched off the light. It was time to go to bed, and she started negotiating how much could she close the door. If she closed it completely, the room would be filled with dark. If she left it open, there'd be this sliver of light coming through into the room. And it was really about how much I could handle in terms of fear. Could she close it completely? No, Mom, please don't do that. And she was trying to get it more and more closed, and I was negotiating for more and more open. And finally, when we'd settled on just how much light I was comfortable with and happy to have beaming through the room she left, and I was contemplating this, looking at the contrast between the light and the dark of the room. And that's when one of the gems of insight that, of course, at the time I didn't realize, there's no Hollywood moment that announces when wisdom or insights make their way through to us. But there was this insight, and this insight grew over the decades and has become a full teaching, a full understanding. But it had its seed in that moment, and I'll share the insight with you. It's an insight that I think plays a huge role for our ability to claim our wholeness, our ability to understand what it means to be seeing clearly, to have wisdom, and the power of that. I was particularly afraid, even at 8 years of age, because although for a couple of years I'd been comfortable with having the door closed, an experience happened that made me very, very frightened, quite traumatic, in fact. I'd been fast asleep in the dark, comfortable. I slept on a double bunk. My younger sister was sound asleep below me. And I always loved the dark. I especially liked glimpsing through the window, looking at the stars, looking at the moon. I had no problem with being in the dark. But just a week or so before the story that I'm telling you, I had been lying there and falling asleep, and an inner prompting had said, "Don't fall asleep." And I wanted to sleep, loved sleeping, but this nudge was, no, wake up, wake up. So I opened my eyes and noticed that there was a wetness about my eye. And it was, no, you need to pay attention. There was this strong, clear feeling of instruction. You need to pay attention. So I paid attention and I touched the wetness, and it felt strange. I thought, there's some moisture, there's liquid on there's something weird's going on. What is this on my face? So I just pulled my covers off and crawled along the top of the bunk bed. And the way the bed was positioned in the room, it was always a fun game, in fact, to stretch and reach to the wall across where the door was. Because if I just stretched enough, that's where the light switch was, and I could turn on the light. And I knew where it was. So even in the dark, I was so familiar with this little game of being able to reach the light from my bed without having to climb off the bed. So I reached across and I turned on the light and looked, or sort of naturally turned back towards the bed, and across the room were the two little dressing tables that my great-grandmother had gifted us. It was quite a family event. Each of the granddaughters at a certain age were given a little dressing table with a mirror. And staring back at me was my reflection. There was no thinking, there was no analysis, there was just screaming. I began screaming the kind of scream that is only possible with raw terror, because looking back at me was my face filled with blood, and blood that had drenched my pajamas, and my whole face was just bleeding. And of course, my screams summoned my parents. My mother rushed in, calmed me down. And what had happened is that, if I go like this, you can see this scar. It's the second, the first scar is ear to ear. At age 4, I had a tumor, a fibrous dysplasia tumor behind this eye that was removed, and then it regrew. And I had this regrowth, which had to have a second surgery. And the second surgery was just this cut here. And what had happened is that a small opening, where apparently there had been a drain for blood, hadn't sealed or healed completely properly, and that this had broken open while I was falling asleep and had started bleeding profusely. Fortunately, it stopped, and my mother explained to me that it was just a small thing and that it stopped bleeding, and comforted and not to worry, it's all over. And we washed, and I got dressed, and we cleaned the bed and replaced the linen. But I was in a state of shock and went back to bed. But now, no, Mom, keep the light on. And I couldn't go to sleep with the light off for a little while, or had to have the door at least very open so that the passage light would come in. So now this memory of my mom and I negotiating every night with a little less light, I suppose she thought this was helping me to get back to feeling comfortable and safe. And I was lying now in bed looking at this stream of light, and the haunting of this memory, this traumatic memory, probably still very fresh in my young mind and body. But here is where an insight arrived, because I was now afraid, equally almost, of what the light could reveal. But I was terrified of the dark because I didn't know that this was happening, right, until the light was on. And lying there looking at the way the light came into the room was this simple idea that they're not the same. The shadow, the dark, and the light are not the same. The dark isn't trying to push its way into the passage. They're not fighting each other at the doorway. The light is simply coming into the dark room. And I don't think I fully understood the full depth of the seeing, but it was this idea that they are not the same, and that all the dark is a lack of light. It just doesn't have light. That's why it's empty, like a cup's empty and you pour water in it. This room is empty of light, and that's why the light fills it. And there was something about this seeing, this clarity, that was comforting. And over the decades, it grew into a full teaching, a teaching that I've actually been fortunate enough to share with many, many thousands of people over many countries over the years, as I've trained master coaches, worked with leaders, given talks around the world. So the teaching starts with darkness is not an equal opposing force to light, and that this is also true symbolically. Everything that darkness symbolizes, ignorance, fear, a sense of lack, that is not a force. It doesn't have power in its own right. And when it is met by its opposite, apparent opposite, the symbol of light, it simply moves in, because darkness is simply a lack. It is an empty room. And what is light but wisdom, clear seeing and clear being, or true seeing and true being? Even the ability to face the incredible trauma and the incredible struggle of what it means to be a human being, even to face our tears, our bleeding, our vulnerability, our humanity. So every part of us that feels like it's in the dark, it's an opportunity for us to open that door and let truth and clarity and wisdom in. Coaching myself to do this my whole life has been one of the most incredible gifts teaching others to do the same and to become master coaches, as leaders, as consultants, as guides, facilitators. It's one of the great rewards of my life.